Hello, I'm Professor Lieu, here today with art prof teaching artist Lauren Welch.
Hi guys.
Welcome to our video where we critique contemporary art by some well-known people, some of whom I think you are going to recognize. If this is your first time here and you can't afford to take an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof: tutorials, critiques, monthly art challenges, career advice. You want to get started by subscribing to our channel and ringing the bell to make sure you don't miss out on anything. I think a lot of people know who Anthony Hopkins is, but let's just give people a basic primer because some people may not know. I don't know about you, Lauren, but the first movie I think about for Anthony Hopkins is definitely Silence of the Lambs because
Yeah,
that movie traumatized me.
I actually didn't see Silence of the Lambs until like a couple years ago, and I think I was really glad I waited because as a child I would be terrified. What I know him better in, though, is in Westworld, where he basically plays the same kind of psychopath. So,
The thing that I think a lot of people are not aware of is that Anthony Hopkins is an actor, but he's also a pretty hardcore artist. He shows with Jeff Meacham Galleries in Las Vegas. And by the way, he's in the studio 4 times a week. I was like, dude, I'm not in the studio 4 times a week. He's also a pianist. And I was like, he's such a renaissance man. Like, I had no idea that he did all these things.
he's an artist through and through.
So, anyway, I read a little bit about when he started painting, and he has not been painting for that long. Basically, he started making artwork intensively in 2003, and basically, his wife found a bunch of his old drawings, and she asked him, "Why don't you paint?" And he said, "I can't paint." And I guess she convinced him to get up and start painting, and now he's working pretty consistently. So I always find it really interesting when I see artists who work in multiple areas. I mean, a lot of people may not know this about me, but I was a musician for a very long time, played
Yeah,
with
oh well.
orchestras for years and years. I actually had to give it up because of Art Prof. So we can thank Art Prof for shutting down my musical side. Maybe I'll get back to it when my kids are a little bit older. I think that's really cool that you can meet all these people, know them for one thing, and then find out later that there's just so many more sides to them as an artist.
By the way, look, we've got our favorite artists here that have joined us in the chat. We've got 10,000 Crows, Tammy, Lahona, and they're all saying hello.
Hey guys, have you guys seen Anthony Hopkins' artwork before? Did you know that he was an artist? Or did you only know him as an actor? I'm just curious because I had no idea until I started really looking into it. The artwork we are going to critique today is this painting. It's done in acrylic. It's from 2017, and the title of it is Circus Magic. I was going through and I was looking at his other work, and you can see from looking at the pieces that almost all of them have a face of
Yeah,
some version.
yeah.
The faces really fluctuate quite a bit in terms of expression. Like this one looks extremely alert, and this
I
one
love
I think is a
that.
little bit more subdued. But I think what interests me about this painting, despite the brilliant colors, I feel like this is a very sad expression. Do you get that feeling?
Oh, yeah, it's super sad. I feel like I mean, it's the sad clown. There's
Is
a
it
lot.
though? I don't read it as a clown. I mean, I know
I
it's
mean,
called
I
Circus
don't read it.
Magic.
There's this, yeah, I do agree that it's very sad, and like the colors only serve to contrast that and make that more intense. Like, I feel like this person's very lost.
Lost, and also to a certain degree, I feel like they're being consumed. They're falling into this pit. And
Yeah,
I, for different reasons, actually like the color scheme. Because I think a lot of people think, oh, well, if I'm going to make a sad expression, at least in the US, I think a lot of us associate, okay, cool blues and grays, that's going to make somebody look a lot more sad. And if I'm going to
yeah,
make them happy, I'm going to put bright colors. So I do like that that's somewhat unusual. That's not what you expect to see.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, I actually do like the color scheme quite a bit.
The knee jerk reaction is to pick the very gray thing. I still pick the very gray thing. Like subdued colors are awesome for that reason. There needs to be some harnessing of these colors here. When people first get into acrylic and first get into painting, they're really like wowed by all the colors. They're like, oh my God, I could put this and this and this together. Like myself included, I have done this like so often. You just want to put like all the textures and the colors together and make like the brightest thing possible. Class, it was called unicorn vomit syndrome. That's what I had.
That's not very complimentary.
Or clown vomit syndrome, which there's a little bit of that going on here, just a little bit. It's where like the colors don't have like a clear like they do have one function here, and that's to obscure the face. That is working well.
So you think that it's a matter of balancing the colors a little bit better?
Being more deliberate about why the colors are there. I think there is a start to that in that I do feel like there's a sense of layering going on here that is very nice, that is kind of beautiful. When I was looking at this to begin with, I thought a lot of the way Giacometti layers his lines to create these really like, compelling portraits. The oil paint is layered on top of each other, and it makes the face feel like it's falling backward or falling inward, and you just like focus on the eyes and the gaze. And I feel like that's also happening with this piece. Like, can you guys see the similarity? Do you guys in the chat see that similarity? I feel like probably Anthony Hopkins has looked at Giacometti at some point. Like I definitely get that feeling. There's that same, also Giacometti tends to do this thing with like gauntness with the faces, like they're very hollowed out. It's a very thin-faced figure, or thin-faced person.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that Giacometti was primarily a sculptor. I mean, I think he's a brilliant painter, absolutely. But I do think that his training as a sculptor translated into his painting practice. And so if you look at these Giacometti pieces, there definitely is a sense of structure to these faces, and they are extremely volumetric. And so I don't know necessarily what Mr. Hopkins, isn't he a Sir Anthony Hopkins? I feel like he got knighted at one point.
Fancy enough for that.
Anyway, I feel like his work could use maybe a more sculptural perspective. And so what I say to a lot of people is, look, if you want to be more sculptural with your paintings, try doing some sculpture and just see where that takes you. Because I initially started doing sculpture because I was a painter at the time, and I wanted to get better at painting by doing sculpture. So I think that's something that he should think about pursuing.
Yeah, the two are definitely related. I see someone who's thinking about 3 dimensions. It's just this, like very flat layering, and less of the Giacometti type sculptural, like 360-degree 3D thinking. By the way, we've got a new subscriber here, Mariana, who's saying hello from Portugal.
Wow, very cool.
I feel like it's pretty late there. I feel like it's like 3 in the morning.
Tammy is saying, I just remember watching Silence of the Lambs, and it disturbed me for weeks. Yep, you and like every person who saw that movie.
That's like the slow creep. You feel like it's fine until like you think about it afterwards, and you're like, oh my God.
Yes.
I would like to see maybe some different types of brush strokes. Palette knifing, using that to manipulate the colors around, like have more differentiation between things that are like really textured and things that are smoother. Mariana says, I think there's also a bit of composition problem. The placement of the face feels a bit random. I agree. It's a little bit off. I mean, like, I also don't like things like straight in the center, you know? I don't think that's good. This feels like it just needs to be considered a little bit more. Maybe some thumbnailing would help.
I feel like I would love to see the face a little bit lower down. So maybe you could feel almost a little bit more gravity and weight to the color. Because if we're talking about a figure that feels somewhat morose and a little bit down, I like the idea of putting them lower in the composition because you don't see that very much. I think most of the time when people are painting a portrait with just the face, the first impulse is to just put it right in the middle. But
Yeah.
sometimes just offsetting it a little bit completely changes the compositional dynamic. So I would agree, Mariana. I think that that would be a really good compositional move for this piece. I
Yeah.
think that I would love to see him do a painting that's just palette knife alone.
For the same reasons, I would love to see a painting that was just made with brushes.
Oh, you mean without anything else? Because I think it's clear if you look at the eyes, maybe he's using the back of a brush or something, but it seems like he is like carving into the
Yeah.
acrylic.
I feel like there's a lot of carving or building going on here, and I think that can sometimes be distracting from the rest of the elements of the painting.
Well, do you think he's not tapping into the brush enough as a tool?
Kind of, yeah. I think that there are more ways to use a brush, more deliberate ways that would be helpful. I would also look at someone like, I keep bringing her up, but Jenny Saville is also someone who I feel like really can make like a good, confident brush stroke.
Well, if we're going to talk about Jenny Saville, we better talk about Willem de Kooning because I
Yes.
know that
Oh,
Jenny
good.
Saville has really studied Willem de Kooning's paintings, and you can see the influence if you look at her paintings up close.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Bring him up.
Yep, he's
He's
right there.
he's such a good one because um everything has such energy. Like there's so much confidence and energy and athleticism. And I feel like Anthony Hopkins has a kind of energy that can be used that could be harnessed in that way. It's just like there's power, but it needs to be like centered.
Do you
Does
think
that make
it's a
sense?
matter of rhythm and pacing in the marks?
Yes, I do. I do. I think that the rhythm needs to be well, there needs to be a rhythm. Right now, it feels like a cacophony.
Well, if we look at, for example, this close up of this de Kooning image, I think what I really have taken away from de Kooning is that he's really good with a dry brush.
Hmm.
Because, I mean, granted, de Kooning's using oil, which is a little bit different than the acrylic, but I
Yeah.
do find that a lot of people, when they start painting, they tend to load up their brush so it's like a really wet brush. And I
Yeah.
love dry brushing because it has a texture to it. And I personally feel like I can control it better. So I'm
Yeah.
a big fan of people playing between a really wet brush and a really dry brush.
The mixing, it would also be helpful for the way that he's thinking about layering right now, too, because when you use a dry brush, what's really great is you can get some great optical mixing effects because the dry brush, the paint only gets pulled so far across. You know, the blending is not super smooth. So you're seeing many colors simultaneously, and it creates like this really buzzy effect for the eye.
Maybe it's about trying to establish more of a hierarchy in the marks because if we go back and we look at these de Kooning images, like I found this one, I think this one's really scary looking. In fact, we were talking earlier about that Joker movie. I feel like this is like de
Yeah.
Kooning's female Joker. Like she's
Oh,
so
definitely.
scary looking.
Like this painting is the face that appears in my nightmares.
Yes, exactly. And that sour lemon yellow is not
Oh,
helping.
it's hard to sit with, but there again is that kind of that emotion that oh, it's like an ennui. Is that how you say it? Ennui?
Boredom.
Ennui, dissatisfaction or upsetness, like a bellyache. That's it's not quite melodramatic. It's just kind of like ah. And I feel like that energy exists in both Willem de Kooning's woman painting and Anthony Hopkins' very bright, loud painting.
Well, I think one thing to consider is the speed of your mark. So if you look at Anthony Hopkins' painting, there are some marks that almost seem to like drip really slowly. It's almost like if you're in a car and you see rain dripping slowly down the
Yeah,
window. Whereas
like
if you
oh,
look
very
at these de
chill. That's
Kooning
very fancy.
images, there is this like hyper motion to some of these strokes where they're just like whipping
Oh,
around like
well,
super fast.
Actually, thinking of it this way gives me a new appreciation for Anthony Hopkins's painting because now I'm looking at it as if you're looking through a very dirty window and seeing this face.
That's a
And that
really dirty window.
it's a very dirty window, or maybe you're digging and you're seeing and you just dug out this person's face, like this person is underground. Seeing it that way, like having the colors feel create like this removal between your personhood and that person, but connecting with the eyes because the eyes are almost totally clear. That kind of feels more effective and more scary for me. Like I am having a moment now because you said that.
Those of you who are watching right now, do you interpret this as a sad, morose figure, or do some of you maybe see different types of emotions? Because the thing is, the facial expression in this painting, it's not super blatant, right? Like, there's no like gigantic frown, there's no like single tear, there's nothing that is like really making it hyper obvious. And so I want to know how other people are seeing it because when I first looked at it, I have to admit, I didn't think it was a sad image. It took me a little while to settle into that interpretation. Let's
It's
see.
weird.
Mariana is asking, any tips for making looser paintings? I can get pretty loose with my drawings, but when it comes to painting, I seem to tighten up, and if I try to get looser, the color tends to just get muddy. Lauren, what do you think?
Loose paintings are hard. I'm personally a very tight painter, so I have some of the same issues that you do, but I try to keep my paints in separate jars and not really mix on the canvas unless I absolutely have to and it's a simple mix. I try to go at it with like a gesture drawing approach where I'm like blocking in lights and darks just like as fast as I can, like really quickly, but not really mixing up the colors so much because that can get really finicky really quickly.
You know what helps me, Mariana, is I do the exact same thing. I'm the worst offender when it comes to painting too tightly, and I'm very conscious of it. But what I started doing that helped me was I started painting with brushes that were just a little bigger than I wanted them to be. Because there's an
Yeah.
awkwardness to having a brush be a little bigger than you wish it was. And at a certain point, you have to give up on the control because the brush is so awkward that you can't control it, literally. And so I try to not give myself teeny tiny brushes until like the very end of the painting. I mean, if it helps you, get one of those like painter's brushes that they use to paint houses. You know, the ones that are like 3 inches wide? Like, you can't be tight with a brush that's that big. So you might just try that out. I think sometimes that's helpful. Let's see, in the chat, Tammy is saying that they see disappointment. 10,000 Crows sees someone who's on drugs or drunk or intoxicated. And Kiyomi is saying self discovery realization. And they are also recommending bigger brushes. Wow, that's so interesting, isn't that? Like, that's a pretty broad range of emotions, don't you think? So many people had such a different interpretation. I think what I would like to talk about is the transition from the background to the face. Because I feel like if I were to break down the parts of this painting, it comes down to the background and the face. There isn't a lot else going on in terms of recognizable imagery. So,
Yeah.
how do you feel about that relationship? How do you think that's working?
Right now I feel like they're kind of fighting with each other, but then that could be the point of the image. Again, like I feel like this painting really for me is in a place of not being resolved yet. It needs like a certain amount of deliberation in one way or the other. But right now, the things that I'm seeing are the background, which is kind of make it, which also serves as the foreground because it's covering up the face. Like it's more foreground than the face. It is kind of trying to do this transition into this clarity, especially towards the eyes. But then there's still like all these spots around. And I think what I would like to see is maybe that transition be like slightly more gentle because right now it seems like really loud, really loud, really loud, right up until it meets the face, and then it like stops around the eyes.
Well, I think part of it is his painting technique changes pretty abruptly from
Yeah,
the background
exactly.
into the
It's
face.
abrupt. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
the background for me actually feels more sculptural than the
Yes.
face. I
I
think the way the
agree.
face is done is actually rather flat by comparison. Well, let's talk about the way the face is actually drawn, because I think that it could work if the face and the background were drawn in the same style.
Yes.
But
I
the thing is, compared to the background, the eyes actually don't have a lot of articulation. Like they're that typical outline of
yeah.
the eyes with the pupils in the middle. But then it's like what I struggle with my students when I'm teaching them portrait drawing. People tend to draw the outline of the eyes, but they don't draw
Yeah.
what's around the eyes. So
Yeah.
I always say to them, look, you guys, you have to draw like the eye socket. You got to draw the eyelids, and that's what makes an eye. Because people get super focused on the pupil because that's where we connect when we look at somebody, but actually it's all the stuff around the pupil that makes an eye look a lot more three-dimensional.
I mean, I agree with that, but I also don't really feel like his intention was to make something that felt more realistic. Like I get this sense of it being a little pop arty as well.
That's
Like
true. I mean, you're right. I don't think that his intent is to be anatomically correct, but maybe just to work around the eye a little more so that it segues more smoothly into that background.
yeah.
Because
Uh,
actually, if you look at Emil Nolde,
yeah,
I don't know how to say his name,
I think it's no
but he does massively distorted faces. But I do feel, looking at especially his paintings, that there is a sculptural quality to them, even though they are fairly simple, actually, as portrait studies.
Was he from like the expressionist period?
Yeah, he was part of the German Expressionists, so he was
Yeah.
a contemporary of people like Max Beckmann and Kathy Kollwitz and Oskar
Yeah.
Kokoschka. And I really love his work because there's so much character and personality in his pieces.
Yeah, I think that is a big thing right there because the German expressionists were really big on that personality thing, also like the psyche, the feeling of despair. Like it was very dramatic, and all the images that come from the German expressionist period, like they all follow that drama. There's always that drama. So that was part of Emil Nold or Nolde's style, but it was also like part of the what was going on with artists at the time. And so I do think that there is a point of similarity there because Mr. Hopkins or Sir Hop what I don't even know how to refer to him, Clara.
I
Uh,
don't know. I think he's a sir because he got knighted.
Sir Anthony Hopkins is also reaching for some of that drama. I think some of that despair a little bit. Like we were talking about how it wasn't a happy image, so I do think that that's a very apt comparison.
Well, if you look at some of his other paintings, I mean, these are loud paintings. Like, these are the types of paintings you can't just walk by them. Like, they
They really,
definitely are pieces that are just going to grab you as
yeah.
you go by. I mean, part of it's the color, but a lot of it's the very intense facial expressions.
I feel that way about Kokoschka as well. Like you stop in front of one of it's too bad we don't have him on here. You are arrested by one of his pieces because the face is so like dramatic and weirdly formed and stuff. Actually, based on that, like uh I could see the point that you're talking about focusing more on the different parts of the face because all of those artists like yeah, it was more than just the eyes and the nose and the mouth.
Well, I just feel like right now he's almost like tracing the facial expression. He's not
Yeah.
really carving it out of the paint. And I think given that the paint looks pretty heavy and thick in this painting, there's an opportunity that really could be explored.
Which portraiture tutorials would you refer him to?
I think I would love to see him check out your mixed media acrylic painting tutorial.
Wow.
Well, because what's cool about that tutorial is that I don't think a lot of people realize how much you can do with acrylic in terms of mixing things into it that you just can't do with oil. Like in oil, there's a whole archival issue because if you take something and you mix it in with the oil, eventually the oil is going to like eat it. So
Yeah.
in 200 years, it's not going to be around. But with acrylic, I mean, in that tutorial, you're mixing coffee grounds
Oh
and
yeah.
making this like very primitive paste. And it really feels like a sculptural painting to me. And I think a lot of it is the diversity of materials that you are mixing into the acrylic.
That exact reason is why I was thinking more about like collage type tutorials. Like maybe you should get into like some visual journaling or something, because doesn't he use some materials that are not even paint? Like I feel, or at least even the way they're put together, it feels like a series of images put on top of each other, not just this image itself, although this one has the one that we're critiquing has things that feel layered very flatly on top of each other. But in the previous ones you went through, I was sure I saw like maybe even like a cutout flower or a cutout eye or something.
Well, you know what I think would be really cool is maybe doing collage as a warm up for the paintings.
Yeah.
That I
Yeah,
think would
that's
look
a
great.
great idea. That's the thumbnailing process. That's the sketchbook process.
Well, because when I look at these paintings, I can't imagine that doing like a pencil drawing would be very helpful, right?
Mm, yeah, not super helpful. It could be in its own way, but I definitely think he would probably get a lot out of doing stuff with markers as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my God, he'd be so good with markers.
You take 5 colors and those are your 5 colors, or you lay out your palette basically ahead of time and then you stick to that.
Oh, that would be so good. So basically, I guess what we're saying is that he should do some pieces before starting the acrylic painting
Yeah.
just to work out maybe some compositional ideas. So
Yes.
using collage, marker, maybe even collage and marker together to make
Yeah.
small scale studies and then segue into the painting.
You know, that's what Eloise does, and it really helps her. And I mean, I know a lot of artists that actually do that. The collaging materials goes like, yes, you can use papers, but it would be also helpful to think of, say, using textiles or
If he were to take maybe some old paintings
yeah,
that
yeah.
he didn't care about anymore, he could like collage those paintings and make a new one from that. I found it extremely liberating. Like it felt really good to just take a mezzotint, which has been sitting in this like precious pile for years and years, and just rip it to shreds and then put glue on it. And I don't know. I found it incredibly satisfying to do
Well,
that.
then it's like you're not tied to the image anymore. Now it gets to be a whole new thing, and you don't know what that is. And we talk about being tied to our things a lot, like Marie Kondoing stuff, cleaning out the house and getting rid of stuff that doesn't bring you joy. But I think the same is about like our painting ideas a little bit, or our artistic ideas. Just we get really stuck on something and it keeps us from moving forward as artists. And so when you do that physical process of ripping something apart.
I mean, I think what was really fun about ripping apart my artwork was actually, I felt like I was cheating a little bit.
Yeah,
I was like, this is so fast. Like, I got results really quickly with very little effort.
But you still had all that effort before that, you know? That you
No, I did. I just feel like I'm not used to getting results that quickly. So it was a really fun experience. I highly recommend it because how many of us don't have old drawings and paintings lying around that honestly are not really going to go anywhere? I mean, I'm not Picasso. I can't sell this scribble for $5,000, right? So I got to do something with it. But one other artist that you pulled was Chris Ofili. And he's really good to look at because this is not a face-driven image, but I do think there are a lot of correlations, like especially if we look at this detail of this bigger piece. This actually looks pretty similar, don't you think?
I mean, that's why I pulled them, because I do think that there are like a lot of transitional things that are going on there very similar. I mean, obviously they're two very different artists operating in very different circles and ideas, but yet the way of making the image has a certain amount of like similarity. What I love about Chris Ofili is that he's very deliberate about the kinds of materials that he includes. Like some of it's like really wacky, but still has like if you were to ask him about it, like still is a very specific reason for being there.
But I love Chris Ofili's work because I think the depth of texture is so rich. I mean, don't
Yeah.
you feel like there's just millions of galaxies in this painting?
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I could, and that, yeah, it's that layering thing. Like, I feel like I could look, yeah, as if with a telescope, like, look on one surface, but then like zoom in and find like a whole new set of surfaces underneath and whole new sets of images. If you look very closely at the way that these things are layered on top of each other, like, it's very intricate.
Chris Ofili is interesting because on one hand, his work looks really spontaneous
I don't
and
think
very
that's,
gestural, but there's no way that it could have been made that way because look at
yeah.
the amount of detail.
Yeah, it's like a real paradox, and anyone I would recommend if you're near a museum that has his work, like go and take a look. Like it's way different than seeing it on a screen.
I mean, I'm bummed because I've never actually seen his paintings in real life. I've seen his drawings, but that's not remotely the same
Yeah,
thing.
that's not the same medium at all.
Right.
I mean,
But
sorry.
I think what I like about Sir Anthony Hopkins, we still can't figure out exactly how
I
to
know.
address him. It's so awkward. I haven't had that issue before. But what I do like about the work is that it feels like painting that is not apologetic at all. So,
Yeah,
yes, I mean, there are some areas where I think he could definitely expand in different directions. I mean, mostly what we're recommending is just trying out different media to
yeah,
enhance the painting practice. And he's really productive. I mean, I was
yeah.
looking at all of the stuff about his paintings online. He has a lot of work. I'm like, dude, you've only
Yeah.
been working since 2003. Anyway, I hope you guys will explore our other related videos like Lauren's mixed media acrylic painting tutorial. We also have a painting tutorial playlist and lots of critiques on paintings. And if you guys would like to grow as an artist, I would recommend that you subscribe to our channel and ring the bell. And lastly, thank you to our top Patreon supporters who make all of this possible. We greatly appreciate your support. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thanks,
Bye.